As a thought leader, being a YouTube host is new to me. And so I'm still learning this process. Maybe some of you are as well. And part of that is that you're going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen. It's not going to be perfect. And I've had to learn to forgive myself. I've got a great team who are helping me do that. Now, sometimes you might hear a cat in the background because I have a kitten who's just 9 months old and who loves to play with all of my equipment. And I do work from home, as many of you now are. And it's okay to live our lives and work at the same time. I think it's actually really important. Here on YouTube, we're all friends, right? We get to live our lives. And even though I like to show up here looking my best, or at least as best as I can, I still have a life that's going on in the background. And so I figured you'd forgive me for that. You know, today I thought I'd give you a little bit about my origin story and about how I came into this world of thought leadership. My background, I spent most of my career working for very large advertising agencies, some of the largest agency networks in the world, and I worked on some of the world's largest brands. My job, I started off in direct marketing and progressed in my career all the way through to client services and eventually into brand planning. And when I left the agency world, I was a senior vice president of strategy for a large agency. Now that work was really challenging. I had to do a lot of learning on a very fast basis, you know. In the advertising world, you never know what's going to be thrown at you, and suddenly you're learning an industry or a product or a new consumer platform in a matter of days and having to turn around full strategies. I loved it until I didn't. One day I woke up and realized that I was an idealist in a capitalist world. Now, what does that mean? When I went into advertising all those many years ago, I really truly believed that I could make a difference in the world. I believed that this powerful medium of advertising, with its reach to millions and millions of people worldwide, the work that I did could create impact, and I could in some small way contribute to changing the way in which we filmed, or the people who were on screen, or the messages that we were putting out there in a way that benefited everybody. But I woke up one day realizing that the impact that I wanted to have, I was never going to do it in advertising. And it was time for me to leave, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, the reality was I had spent most of my career doing just that. Working in advertising, working on marketing campaigns. And while I had some very good skills and I was very successful at it, I didn't know how to transfer those skills. And so I started looking around at other things that I could or might do. And, you know, initially it was just doing things I enjoyed. I had done lots of event management throughout my career, so I worked on a couple of events and, you know, then also did some volunteer work for smaller charities, just helping out wherever I could. One day I had gone to a conference, and now this was in the early teens, 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. At the time, I was a real fan of TED and watched TED videos all the time. And the TEDx brand had just been launched a few years earlier. And I had the very good fortune to be sitting in the audience at a local TEDx event here in Toronto. And I was blown away. The quality of the speakers, the topics the speakers spoke on. I was on fire. My brain was just wanting to think about how I could do some of the things that they were describing. And as I sat there at the end of that show, in the audience with a friend of mine saying how blown away I was, somebody in front of me in the audience turned around and said, "You know that everything that we just saw today was all volunteered." And I was now even more blown away. Volunteered. It was an exceptionally well-run event. The speakers were incredible. I knew I wanted to get involved. So sitting there in the audience, I literally opened my phone and went onto the TEDx Toronto website and put in an application to volunteer. Well, long story short, I got hired as a speaker's coach. Well, I didn't even know what a speaker's coach was. But the reality was my whole job was all about presenting. I mean, as a vice president of strategy, I was doing research, I was presenting campaigns, I was, looking at creative. So every day I was presenting. I was pretty good at it. And I figured with a little bit of training, yeah, sure, I could get this. That first year working on TEDx Toronto was a game changer for me, because what happened was I learned that I had a skill I didn't even know I had. In the agency world, as I said, things come at you fast, and you've got to learn and assimilate and distill in a very fast fashion. And by doing that, I had to be able to come up with what we called core consumer insights. Now, as a head of strategy and planning, my job was to work between our clients and the products that they were selling, and our creative teams and the ways in which they were promoting creatively those products. So what I had to do as head of strategy was to understand the consumer. That was my job. And so we would do primary and secondary research. We would come up with what the consumer problem was that this product was meeting. We would assimilate all of that information down into what is called a core consumer insight. That core consumer insight is what we would build a creative brief off. A creative brief is what is given to our creative teams to be able to build all the creative that you see in market. As the planner and strategist, I worked between the client and our creative teams and represented those consumers. Well, that skill, that ability to be able to distill large swatches of information down into a single insight was the exact skill that I needed to be a speaker's coach, a TED speaker's coach, because of course, TED is all about ideas worth sharing. And that idea is the core idea that each speaker puts out into the world. In that first year, I was working with, one of the foremost experts in the world on body language, Mark Bowden. I was working with a scientist who was working on the Human Genome Project, decoding our genome, Dr. Brendan Frey. I was working with an architect who was figuring out how to create connections between our built environment and the technology that runs it. Now, this was, like I said, in the early teens. A lot of this, we were still in the very early days of it. Those individuals had a lifetime worth of knowledge that they wanted to get out in less than 18 minutes, and in most cases, less than 10. They came to me as a speaker's coach, and I remember the very first session that I had with Mark Bowden, who I adore. And if you don't know Mark, I suggest you go and watch some of his videos. He is doing incredible things right now with a team on body language. He's got a great YouTube channel. We'll link it in the description for you. But Mark, I remember, came in, and at the time he was doing keynotes and workshops all over the world. He's an expert in body language. And as we sat down to go through all the things that we were going to be doing as a TED speaker, and me as his TEDx speaker coach, I said to him, Mark, look, you know how to do this. Not only are you already a speaker and an expert in body language, but he's also a trained actor. And I said, I don't have anything I could possibly teach you. And he looked at me and he said, well, here's the thing. Most of my presentations are half day, full day, 3 days. And he said, you want me to get this down into 18 minutes or less? And he said, quite frankly, I don't know how to do that. And he said, I think you do. And he was right. I did. I knew how to do that. And Mark gave me a gift in telling me that. He made me understand that my background, my knowledge, my experience was unique. And even though I, at the time, knew very little about body language, what I did know about was narrative development and storytelling. And so he and I collaborated, and we built out a story for him that is a very popular TED Talk. And if you haven't seen it, again, we'll link it in the description box. His TEDx talk is fantastic, how to be inauthentic. But I learned something about myself. I learned that I had a skill. I had a skill that was unique to me. I had knowledge that was unique to me. And here I was helping some of our brightest minds in the world, not just that year, but in the years since. And I was applying my unique knowledge. I've come to understand that that is a really important point. And it's something we talk a lot about on this channel, which is, what is it that makes you unique? What is it that you bring to your idea, your topic, that is different from everybody else? Look, I'm not the only speaker's coach in the world. I'm not the only person helping thought leaders step into their voice. but my unique knowledge and experience and skills and who I am as a person and how I show up gives me a uniqueness that no one else can copy. And that's what I want you to find. So my origin story of how I came into this world has helped me to develop my ideas. What I talk a lot about is about the ability to transform experts and change makers, those people who are having impact on our future. Help them transform into thought leaders by using story so that they can deliver their ideas in a way that creates the impact that they want to make, so that we can build and co-create a vision for our future that is representative of all who are going to be living in it. So that is sustainable for the long term. That's what I work on every day. I truly believe that every one of us has the ability to impact our future, to co-create that vision. 2 years ago, I found out that I was neurodiverse. Up until that point, that word didn't even exist for me. And while I always knew I was a little different from everyone else, I just attributed it to me being a little bit of a rebel or perhaps a nonconformist. I used to call myself that a lot. Maybe the blue hair is a bit of an indicator on that. But what I learned by going through a diagnosis, my brain works a little differently than other people's. And it helped me to understand that throughout my entire career, I had been treated differently. I had been expecting different things of myself. I'd been showing up trying to fit in my own nonconformist way, but wanting to live by the rules that were being given to me. But the reality was my brain worked differently. My executive functioning works in a way that sometimes doesn't let me focus in the way that I want to, or gives me messages that actually aren't helpful. And in understanding my own neurodiversity, I've come to understand that that's actually a part of my thought leadership. Because you see, while it inhibited me from fitting into the world that isn't neurodiverse, what it gave me was a different perspective on that very same world and on the projects and the products that we were all working on. You see, my brain works really fast. And so when we would start brainstorming, I would come up with the solution almost instantly. It's not just that my brain works fast, it's that it identifies patterns very, very quickly. And in identifying patterns, I could see the direct path to often not just one solution, but several. And I could very quickly be able to know what were the pitfalls. But because I was able to do that in the speed with which I was able to do it, I wasn't able to explain it to others why I thought that or knew that. And of course, as we all know, problems have many solutions, and you need to be able to defend what it is that you're coming up with and why, or how you got there, because as the process of getting there often is as important as the solution itself, because you can see where those solutions came from. And so I would get defensive, and I would be confused and frustrated that no one could see these obvious solutions that I was seeing, that what was clear to me wasn't clear to anyone else. And then I would start to question myself. Well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just making it up. Part of me knew I was right, or that I had a solution that was probably pretty effective. My inner critic would sort of speak up, and my ego would tell me that I was making things up, or I was not as good as others. And so I would step back. But what I learned through understanding my own neurodiversity is I learned that just because I couldn't explain it didn't make it wrong. And when I took the time to slow my own thinking down and to understand the patterns that I saw, and to build those patterns into ways for others to understand it, that was where we could all come together. When I came into this world as a speaker's coach and began building my business, what I saw was that all of these amazing humans who are creating such good work in the world, who no one really knows about because they're so busy doing the work, they're not telling anyone about it. What they needed was the support and help of someone like me who could understand their work and convey it in a way that others understood. I then went on from the TED world. It wasn't just the work we were doing with TED speakers, but there were so many speakers who never graced the stages of TED, who had big ideas and impact that they were making, and they needed help. And so what help did they need? What patterns was I seeing that I could help them with? Well, first of all, communications. And I developed a framework that helps develop high impact, short form talks and presentations. We call that the talk canvas. That framework was powerful. It was built out of the work that I did on TEDx Toronto and then eventually many other TEDx's throughout North America. That framework is actually a narrative outlining tool that helps you to develop, whether it be a talk, a presentation, even a text, quite frankly. It helps you to establish all of what you want to say and then deliver it through story. But in order to do that, that framework needed tools within it. So we have two tools that live inside of that framework. We have the idea framework, which helps you to surface and build your idea so that you can hear it yourself and say it in a way that is believable, understandable, and authentic for others as well. That idea framework is very simple, but it's a powerful way for you to be able to build your idea and say it so that it's true and authentic for you. I'll tell you what that framework is. It's actually really simple. It says, today I'm going to talk to you about my topic, and I'll show you my point because here's the impact it's going to create. Now, said another way, really it is a combination of a what, a how, and a why. A what is your topic. The how is your point. Now that is your unique differentiator. That is where only you can activate that topic. So what is it that you bring uniquely that no one else brings to that topic? Topics can often be communicated by many other people and should be, because that's the point of a topic. It's when you combine your topic, your what, with your point, your how, that's where it really gets interesting and it gets unique. So when you put your what, your how together, what you've got is the beginnings of an idea. And for you, as the speaker of that idea, it usually gets you pretty excited because you go, yeah, that's what I want to talk about. That's what I believe. That is what I want the world to know. And it's what only I bring to that topic. But if you stop there, what you're doing is you're robbing yourself and your audience of the passion that you have for it. You see, in the what and the how, you likely are really excited about both of those things. And the reason you do it is probably feels so self-evident to you that you don't even need to say it. But this, of course, is your why. The why is where you and your audience meet. Your why is what your audience wants to know you believe in. Your why is the outcome or the results or the impact of your what and your how. So that little framework that I mentioned earlier is today I'm going to talk to you about what, and I'll show you how, because why. And you can see how just using that little framework helps you to surface what it is that you uniquely bring to the world. And when you use it as a framework to help you hear your own idea, what happens is you start to really refine your thinking. We have that framework and I'd love to make it available to you. So check the description box below. You can download the Talk Canvas, the idea framework with the link that we've put below. There's one more framework I want to talk to you about, and that's the story spine, which also lives inside of the Talk Canvas. Because the Talk Canvas is a narrative outlining tool, what it does is it helps you to get all of the information that you want to put into your talk or your presentation out. Think of it almost as an inventory. And what it does is it maps it in a way that helps you to see how to make it accessible and understandable to your audience. So it's broken that information down into minute parts. So you use the Talk Canvas before you even open up any piece of technology like a presentation software or any form of streaming. What you want to do is to take pen and paper and the narrative outlining framework, the Talk Canvas, and start writing. And you start in the center. You start with your idea. So your idea is where you start writing your presentation or talk. What is that idea? You use the little framework that I just said earlier, your what, your how, and your why, and you build that idea. From that idea, you break it down into all the component parts that have to unpack it. Because you can imagine, if you've got a one sentence idea, it's going to be pretty dense. You're going to need to unpack that for your audience. So you unpack it first in the key messages. You've got an opening message, then you're going to have a support for that message, then you're going to have a takeaway. You're going to do that again, you're going to do that again. All of those are supporting that core idea, that statement of purpose that we just described. Now we've built, using the talk canvas, the center of your presentation. But what we don't have yet, and very purposely don't have yet, is an opening and a closing. Why? Because you can't open or close a talk until you know all of the information that you want to convey in it. And the reason for this is because that opening is actually going to be a story. And that story is going to hold everything that you want to say in that talk in its short 5-minute or so opening that creates an emotional connection with your audience. Your story acts as a bridge to the idea, which then opens up all of those key messages. But when you start your presentation or your talk with a story, what you're doing is you're creating for the audience a way for them to contextualize everything that you're telling them. It acts as a holder for everything. And in fact, that story doesn't just live at the opening. It lives all the way through it. The reason that we built out the middle part of that presentation first is because what we wanted to do was we wanted to know everything that needed to be there. Then we find a story that's robust enough to be able to hold all of that. And we purposefully build that story. We build it out with the knowledge that it's going to live all the way through your presentation. It almost obscures everything because it makes it feel like the whole presentation is a story. But because you've done it purposefully and intentionally, you know all the things you need to say. So the other framework, and maybe you've guessed it, is our story spine. And in fact, what we now call that is our idea-centric story spine, because that story leads to an idea, which leads to the rest of the data and facts and knowledge and other stories and anecdotes that live inside. And then, of course, we've got to close it. Well, the closing of any presentation should always be the last thing you write. Why? Because that closing, it needs to be short, it needs to be succinct, and there are some rules. Rule number 1, no new information on the close. You are not giving new information. Rule number 2, don't use it as a review opportunity. You're not going back and reiterating all of what you've just said. They've heard that. You've got to say it in a way that they can now remember it. How do we do that? So the way in which you close a presentation or a talk starts with going back to that story that you opened on. When you tell a story at the beginning of a presentation or a talk, you're building it very intentionally. There is a structure, which is why the idea-centric story spine is really powerful. What we're doing is we're building to what we call a tension point in that story. That tension point brings the audience to a place where they're probably sitting on the edge of their seat a little bit. What's going to happen? I always like to call it the and then moment. Something happened. So what you're doing is you're almost distracting them, right? I tell you this because, so you're taking them out of a tension point, taking them right into an idea. That tension point, you leave them there. You never come back to that particular tension point for the rest of the presentation until you come to the close. Now, throughout the rest of the presentation, you may have gone to other parts of the story. You may have gone forward in your own story. There may be lots of other things that you're telling, but you never go back to that one tension point until you're ready to close. In the close, that's your indicator. You go, let me go back to that moment, and you bring them back. Now, what you've done is you've now emotionally brought them right back to that moment. So what emotion did you leave them on? Was it fear? Was it joy? Was it suspense? There could be a whole raft of emotions that you left them on, but by going back to that moment, you've put them right back in that emotion. And in doing that, that allows you to emotionally connect with them again, get them really sitting on the edge of their seat. You're finishing your story, and by doing that, it allows you now to go back to that core idea, that statement of purpose. That is the one thing you want them to remember. So rather than giving them a litany of things you've just said, you're going to say one thing, and it's one sentence. And you're going to say it in your own language, but the essence, the underpinning of it is going to be that idea framework, the what, the how, and the why. And that then sets you up to deliver a call to action. What do you want your audience to think or do differently as a result of your talk? Now that is how you deliver an idea-centric story through the lens of a presentation or a talk. So, like I said, we have a tool for you we'd love to give you. And that tool is actually a workbook that has everything I've just told you. It has the idea-centric story spine, it has the idea framework, and it has the talk canvas. And it tells you how to use these things. I can't wait to see you in the next video.